Today is joining me Colby Harder. Colby is a 27 years old woman who was elected in 2022 as city councillor for the city of Langford, British Columbia. She also serves as an alternate director for the Capital Regional District and as a director of the Juan de Fuca Water Distribution Commission. Colby has experience supporting projects related to land use improvement and transportation planning outcomes, and promotes long-lasting community partnership that will help foster local climate resilience and deliver improved social equity outcomes. Colby loves to spend time outside with friends and family, exploring trails and beaches by bike, foot, and paddle. Colby, thank you so much for being here. If I may, I'm going to start with the first question of this interview.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So the first question is this, and I'm going to quote the World Commission of Environment and Development in relation to the concept of sustainability. And I quote, "The development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs." But I want to ask to you, Colby, from your perspective, what does sustainability mean to you in your work and life?
Thanks, Yusuf. It's really great to be here. That is such a great question to kick things off. I think it's one that I'm still trying to figure out fully for myself, but one that I'm really excited to be exploring as a city councillor. When I think about sustainability, I tend to come at it from three different angles, looking at the social sustainability, environmental sustainability, and economic sustainability as well, which is something that I maybe hadn't always considered growing up. But I think that quote really encapsulates it well. It's about making decisions that are flexible and can help meet the needs of people today, but will also serve future generations that maybe aren't born yet. In my community, we are growing at an extraordinary rate. I grew up in Langford, and growing up here, we had a population of about 20,000 people. Today, we're sitting at 53,000 with more to come. And we're actually just starting our planning initiatives to look at what the future will look like when we reach 100,000 people, which isn't too far away, if you can believe it. So it really is a conversation that we're trying to bring lots of people into, so that they can also share their input on what sustainability looks like to them as we sort of redefine ourselves as a city into the future. Looking at it a little bit more granularly, I think it is about designing, for me in my role as a city councillor, sustainability means building a city that allows people to be sustainable without having to try hard. So one of the biggest things can be about land use and transportation, which is near and dear to my heart given my background. But it's about enabling choices for people instead of just asking them to do something and then expecting that they'll have the means and the tools to do what you need them to do. I always take the example of recycling. You can ask people to recycle, but if you don't make it easy, like they don't have the bins to do it, or they don't have the knowledge to understand where things go, you're probably just going to end up with a garbage result.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And about your consular work, I understand that one of the reasons that brought you to run for Langford Council is to serve as a role model, right? For today's youth and to prove that it's possible to live positive change in Langford. And according to this, I want to ask, how can you say you promote this positive change in matters of sustainability practices daily?
Yeah, so I think something that I'm very well known for in my day-to-day life is my passion and love for cycling. I didn't actually grow up cycling. In Langford, we are very car-centric. I was really excited to get my first car at 16 and learn how to drive. And it really wasn't until going to university that I thought about other ways that I could get around. I remember doing, it's the funniest thing to look back on, but the carbon footprint calculators that are available online. I remember I was doing my degree in geography, and so I was interested in seeing what my individual impact looked like. And to my surprise, I had a huge carbon footprint because of how much I was driving. And growing up in a culture where that's just something that you do, it didn't really register with me how much of an impact that made. And so that was one of the key motivators for me to start thinking about taking the bus more frequently, or walking or biking. And then that was really also when I started to see our city differently as well. Being in a car, your road system is typically designed for you to get where you need to go. But if you try to get to the place that you need to go by bike, you don't always have the safest or most direct route options. So now in my day-to-day life, I primarily use a bicycle. I actually purchased an e-bike to allow me to make trips that weren't possible before. And I really try, as funny as this sounds, I try to ride on main roads, and I try to ride in like dresses and professional clothes to show that you can really bike to places that you maybe didn't expect you were able to. And you don't have to show up sweaty and gross. And so it's really about trying to expand the persona of who a cyclist can be. And I used to have a couple of young nieces, so I always loved putting them on the back of the seat to show that you can bike with kids, or you can bike a bunch of stuff around, just to really help people envision what their life could look like if they were to make the similar choice.
Great, thank you so much. And I mean, it's good to keep trying to make these things, but sometimes it's quite hard, and many reasons. I mean, maybe we're in a rush or something. But I want to ask about this. How do you stay motivated to keep contributing in the implementation of these practices? What motivates you?
Yeah, it's definitely a hard thing to do. I think that I try to take the perspective that every day is day one. So even if you didn't do what you were trying to do yesterday, every day is a new opportunity. For me, what has changed my, I guess, my motivation to continue on with sustainable practices is really surrounding myself with like-minded people who also want to see change. So what's following the pandemic, that was pretty hard. Everyone went back into their own homes, and we were quite isolated from each other. But what I found was outdoor activities where it was like riding groups, or cleaning up litters with a bunch of other people in the community, has helped, yeah, just kind of open the door to more conversations where you meet people who have similar concerns about the climate crisis and who are motivated to make a difference at the local level. And often what I've found is that spurs further conversations to create larger impact, and it really just snowballs. So it's not an everyday thing where you are always meeting the most inspiring people and you're having these life-changing conversations. But when you do have them, I think the impact of those conversations really do reverberate beyond, that day. And that's something that really makes me feel passionate about what I try to do every day. Um, and I also love the power of storytelling, being able to tell people, my background and the fact that I didn't always live this way. I'm not perfect. I don't live the most sustainable life that I could. But I think that it's not about being perfect. It's just about trying.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much. And in your opinion, what do you think are the biggest sustainability challenges or obstacles faced by individuals or organizations or cities, if in a bigger perspective, uh, that we face today to integrate sustainability? What could be the biggest challenges or obstacles to integrate it?
So I think this goes back to one of my motivating factors to get into politics as well. So I'm going to think about it from our city's perspective in Langford, because that's something I know quite well. Coming into the term that I've been elected into, one of the biggest realizations is that we don't have many plans to address the crises that we face as a city. So cities across Canada are facing similar levels of concern and challenge when it comes to equality, or inequality, I should say, public health, the infrastructure cost crisis, the climate crisis, and of course, housing affordability in Canada is something that's deeply felt by many. And finding solutions to all of these overlapping crises takes a lot of work. So having a plan in place where you can actually set out goals and have measurable objectives is one of the key parts to, I think, creating long-term change. Now, that being said, being a politician in my role, I often hear concerns that cities are making too many changes too quickly. they're doing it without listening to residents or the impacted people of their community. And that is always pushed up against the urgency of the crisis that we face. So bringing people together is something that is really hard. You know, not everybody has the time or the interest to get involved in civic processes to find solutions that will work for our own lives, our own habits, our own community. And that is something that we're really trying to overcome by, I guess, getting out into the community where people are and helping start that conversation, not by expecting them to come to us, but rather by going to them directly.
Well, and I actually wanted to ask about, you just mentioned about the importance of people getting involved. How is your experience trying to involve people, or what do you suggest the government should be done or should be done in the government to promote more participation from the people?
Yeah, this is something I think, you know, everybody wants the one answer to, and I don't think that there is one answer. What I've found to be successful so far is by presenting the problem in a way that people will actually care about. So, for instance, in Langford, we have a park in the downtown core that is just a small stand of mature Douglas fir trees. It stands out on a map, just given the level of development around it. That particular piece of land was donated to the city back in the 1970s, but houses surrounded it, so it wasn't accessible to the public. Recently, as we've grown as a city, you know, more and more people are living in denser living situations, and they don't necessarily have access to private yard space. So we really need to grow our park spaces for people in the downtown core, so that you have somewhere to go meet your neighbors, so that you have somewhere to go, you know, with your kids, and it helps create that positive feedback cycle where you care about your community. So the parkland in the downtown core, Portrait Park, because it had been sitting, you know, by itself for almost 50 years, there was a lot of work that was needed to bring it up to the standard where we could have public access to it. And so something that I thought was really cool that we did as a city was we took the approach to have community-led cleanup days. So working in partnership with the Green Team of Victoria, we were in there doing invasive species polls and you know, removing woody debris. But we realized that we could get more people involved if we spoke to another key issue that people are concerned about. So not everybody is worried about invasive species, but the threat of wildfire has been something that more and more people are feeling, experiencing, particularly given last summer. And as a city, we were lucky enough to get funding for Fire Smart, which is a program that is ran across the province and works to reduce the threat of wildfire risk in cities. So we teamed up with Fire Smart, our fire department, the city of Langford, and the Victoria Green Team to get into Portrait Park. We brought over 60 people out that day, and we removed truckloads of branches and invasive species, and we were digging up old car pieces and really cleaning out the soil of that little forested area. And when I was talking to people about what encouraged them to come out, you know, they had a bunch of different reasons. Some people really wanted to have that impact of, you know, keeping their community safe. Others really cared about the environmental side of it, the sustainable side of it. Others just wanted to, you know, have a hand in making their future park cleaner and more beautiful. And so having that, you know, it wasn't about asking people to come help us clean out the park, because I think a lot of people would say, well, that's the city's job. I pay taxes, you do it. It was an opportunity to kind of flip the story around and say, we're building this beautiful park together. Come get involved. Come be a part of making our city better for the future. And you know, learn a little bit more about what else you can do. So it really wasn't just the end. Once the event was over, I think it sparked a lot of interest in people to find other ways that they could volunteer.
Yeah, it's just like you said about before about the storytelling, right? It's the way you tell the story, and that's a great way to get the people involved, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And before you mention something about the measurements or have some measurement to identify your impact, and that brings you to the motivation. I want to ask now, how did you suggest we can measure the impact of, or how do you measure the impact of the sustainability practices or initiatives? Are there any specific metrics or indicators you use or the city of Langford use to evaluate success of the impact of their practices in matters of environmental or sustainability?
Yeah, from a city planning perspective, that is sort of how we function is through, key indicators that tell the story about what's going on in the city. So transportation is such an easy example, I think, because there's lots of ways to quantify it. So as a city, actually as a broader region, we have mode share targets that speak to trying to get people out of their cars and into different modes of transportation. So off the top of my head, I think by 2038, our goal is to get 42% of trips, or maybe it's 45% of trips, done in other ways outside of the vehicle. So almost half of our trips need to be taken outside of the car. Um, how you measure that is through a variety of different surveys and studies. You can do on the ground counts where you're actually looking at how many people are biking along certain sides of the trails, how many people are driving, what home ownership, or what rather car ownership looks like for individual households. There's a variety of different data sources that you can pull together to give you the bigger picture. But at the end of the day too, I think you can also look at the anecdotal side of it and have those conversations with people on the street to understand what their habits are doing. If they're saying that they really want to make that change and they'd be interested in, riding the bus somewhere, but the bus doesn't get there on time or it doesn't show up all the time, so they can't rely on it. That is sort of a really great way to qualitatively understand how you're changing the city, or maybe how there's challenges to making the change that you want to create. So yeah, looking at the hard numbers, but then also having the personal stories from many, many people and collecting trends over time is one of the ways that we do that. I think other metrics that you can look at too would be looking at, for instance, transportation is one of our biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. So I always default to that. But you can also look at it too, for cities. Buildings are another really big source of greenhouse gas emissions. So when we're building new buildings, finding ways to reduce our carbon inputs and the end of the day energy outputs that will be coming from those buildings, you can quantify that from the get-go. So that requires us looking at our development processes in a bit of a different way and making regulations so that developers are building high quality buildings that won't just further contribute to the climate crisis as they continue to age once they're built.
Okay. And in one interview, I remember you mentioned something that one of the top three issues in the work issues to work, sorry, in Langford, and if I may add, I will say possibly in most of the cities in the world, is the protection and restoration of natural areas. This you mentioned this ensure resilience through unprecedented climate futures, right? So the question is, Colby, what do you consider is needed to be done to reach this point and to see the needed large scale results?
Yeah, so I think before I speak maybe specifically about conserving natural areas too, I think something else that cities really are looking at is how to increase tree canopy as a way to defend, more urbanized areas that have already been changed against some of the risks of, increased heat and flooding with climate change. So as a city in Langford, that was one of our hallmark first moves, was looking at an urban forest management plan. We're nearly coming up to its completion. I'm really excited. But that was a really great planning exercise that speaks to the last question too, where there was a really big collection of data at the start to understand what our baseline is as a city where areas of the city are lacking tree canopy cover, where areas have a high amount of tree canopy cover, and that allows us to understand where areas and policy opportunities exist to protect the remaining tree canopy and, by defect and often natural spaces. So when it comes to protecting broader natural spaces, I think one of the key challenges is just understanding land ownership. So this, goes beyond just the standard government side of things, but also working with First Nations partners and other levels of government to protect land holdings, but also to allow for, conversely, the development of some spaces to grant reconciliation opportunities for First Nations communities. So it becomes a very delicate dance that unfortunately often comes down to money, and having revenue and funding opportunities to protect high quality land parcels that hold a lot of biodiversity values and a lot of values for other forms of environmental sustainability, be it habitat or just creating habitat corridors at the broader scale. Yeah, I think what that maybe comes down to, again, is just having a plan and having the relationships in place to have those communication or those lines of communication open so that when, private landowners do want to look at developing their land, there's maybe a strategy in place to understand what areas of the land need to be most protected, proactively what areas we should be looking to maybe acquire for parkland and conservation, and then also directing our city services to not encourage further urban sprawl, which I think goes back to the broader question of how do you build sustainable cities? Well, you build them in a way that is going to prevent the cities from sprawling into those natural spaces that people move here for to enjoy. In Langford, that is something that we have, I think, seen a lot of, and that has been a very visible way to encourage people to maybe get involved in making the change. So for instance, 3-4 years ago, just before the election, there was a really large hillside that was clear cut in the city of Langford. And I think that caused a lot of alarm for people, where they saw, entire landscapes being changed. And they really didn't understand why or how that was happening or what was happening. And it motivated a lot of people to look at ways to protect the remaining natural spaces that are still there. And when I think about, the need, I feel like city building is always one of those things where you're pushing up against, conflicting issues. There's a push and pull. There's a benefit and a consequence with every decision that you make. And having that broader plan and that broader strategy to help you make decisions on a day-to-day basis that will have really good long-term impact is probably one of the most powerful things that elected officials and community members can push their elected officials to do.
And we're reaching almost to the end of the interview. And I want to ask before, can you share your hopes and aspirations for integrating sustainability practices into our daily living? And how do you believe these practices can impact our personal lives and the broader community?
So I think one of my hopes and aspirations, again, means getting more people involved into the process. So in my own, my own background, in my own life, I always go back to transportation because it's what I know. But transportation doesn't look the same for everybody. It doesn't feel the same for everybody. And if you are having systems and plans made by, white men, you're not going to understand how you need to build a city for everybody else. And unfortunately, that is historically how our cities have been built and designed. It's just by hearing from a small group of people. But when you do open up the doors to have conversations with your entire community, I think it allows us to create stronger cities that will be more sustainable for people and for problems that maybe don't even exist yet. I have seen so much power from the youth voice in my community. They express their needs for transportation so eloquently and so simply because they're often not driving yet. So they haven't found that solution of just being able to independently get themselves to where they need to go. So, they understand the challenges with our transit connectivity. They know the spots that don't feel safe when you're walking. They understand the barriers that are in place when it comes to being able to afford a bike or being able to, repurchase a bike after it's been stolen. So you're hearing from, I think by hearing from more and more people, you start to understand the collective experience of what your society is going through, which allows you to build systems and make solutions that are actually going to impact greater change. So, yeah, if it came down to just understanding how to integrate sustainable practices into daily living, I think it really is about getting more and more people involved in city planning processes. Um, and it doesn't have to be an everyday thing for them. That's my job. But by giving them the opportunities to give those key touch points, where you want your money to go, where you want to see um, all of the taxes that you pay prioritized, I think it empowers a lot of people to feel like they are part of making a positive change. And even though we're not going to solve the climate crisis and build the perfect sustainability, or even though as a city we're not going to solve the climate crisis or build a perfectly sustainable city in the time that I'm going to be elected, I think that by starting that conversation and slowly starting to turn us in that direction, it's going to encourage more and more young people to stand up and to get involved and to start applying more and more pressure. And I do believe in the power of momentum, where you see one small change start to impact everything around it. And I think that's kind of where we're at as a city. It's a bit of a turning point, but there's a lot of hope in seeing young people rise up and people who maybe haven't necessarily been involved in the process create space for themselves there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Dear Colby, thank you so much for your time and your recommendations and examples. All of them are inspiring and all of them will help to keep motivating and working towards a better world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yusuf. It was an absolute pleasure to be here.